Oliveira Lawyers. Today is Wednesday, March the 25th, 12:32 Rio de Janeiro time, and we are just getting started. And as usual, if you're here with us, you can suggest a topic of your interest to be discussed live. And please do so. Otherwise, we're going to be discussing about other topics. And if you're here with us, why not discuss a topic of your interest, right? And I have here Tora Butterfly. Tora, welcome. Bom dia e boa tarde. You welcome, Tora. Let us know your topics of your interest so we can have a discuss live. And in the meantime, we're going to take a look. We're going to take a look at the news. And today we're taking a look at UOL. UOL is a news portal in Brazil. I think from an internet perspective is probably the most popular portal. And here the headline is about Iran. And it says Iran rejects a proposal from the U.S. to finish up the war. Okay, that's the main headline. There is another major headline here is about politics in Brazil. Former President Bolsonaro's son is for the first time ahead of current President Lula in the dispute for the next presidential election. He also says that President Lula, the rejection is getting to 53.5%. And there you go. More politics. Let me see if there is anything else of interest to foreign citizens. Yes, there is an ongoing dispute, as you probably know, between the Brazilian Supreme Court and the Brazilian Congress. The Brazilian Congress is like, articulating a way to have some level of control over the Brazilian Supreme Court to potentially get one or two of the ministers impeached. And that's a confrontation because of political decisions that were taken by the Supreme Court. And I know it's very difficult for you to imagine that there is no political sides in any type of body, right? So why would you expect to be the case at STF? But the Congress is seeking for something of a more balanced Supreme Court, and on top of that, there are findings, very concerning in terms of involvement of some of the justices of the Brazilian Supreme Court and Banco Master or Bank Master, which is involved in an array of corruption cases. And guess what? There are two ministers closely related to Banco Master, right? So there you go. This is what's going on. And that's what you're going to see in other newspapers today. I just came to UOL to refresh a little bit because, believe it or not, Banco Master is still the main headline for most of the other newspapers, right? Well, there you go. These are the news for today. Let's remind you about our partner, Remax Nomad States. They are based in Rio de Janeiro, based in Leblon, and they actually work with properties through FAO Brazil. They've been assisting many of our clients in Florianópolis, São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Northeast. And there you go. If you have a need for a short list of properties, this is like their contact information. Feel free to get in touch and enjoy the referral. All right. Going back to our live stream, let's take a look. Matt Gaines, boa tarde, Dr. Oliveira. Boa tarde, Matt. I hope you and Adrian are well. Tora, yes, I'm working on my retirement visa for Brazil. I'll be signing on with your firm today. Glad to hear, Tora. Yes, and how is your retirement planning aside of the immigration side? Did you pick a city already? Like, what do you prefer? And sharing with everyone else. We have, a range of preferences, right? Like, I mean, different people, they have different goals. There are people who are going to be very settled on Florianopolis, for instance. Other people, they love the northeast of Brazil. Others, believe it or not, right? And I'm from São Paulo, so that's why I can say like this. Some people, they like São Paulo, which to me is very interesting because it's such a big city, like very metropolitan, a lot of traffic, and a lot of the challenges that goes with like a large city, right? Other people, they are gonna really love Rio de Janeiro, and not difficult to understand why Rio de Janeiro is such a complete package, right? Like, I mean, so beautiful, natural beauties. Trufal is a large city, it's convenient, it has a good airport, really nice people. So Rio de Janeiro is a very complete package, if you will. General Principal, olá, senhor Oliveira, tudo bem? Tudo bem, General Principal, good to see you over here. Yeah, so, different people, different choices in Brazil. There is something for everyone. But yesterday we were doing like some studies about the main destinations for foreign citizens, and it was very clear that most people would choose to be by the coast. It's very rare here at the firm, at least, for people to be planning to go live, inner into the country, like more like Mato Grosso do Sul, Mato Grosso, Goiás, or even the Amazon, right? Like, I mean, there is so much to be seen over there, but not really, popular with at least our clients, very interesting finding. Like, we were doing some statistics here at the firm, and it was very startling, right? Because if you think about the United States, yes, I mean, I guess the largest cities, they are going to be, on the coastlines, right? Like, I mean, New York, and then you have, California. But there is a lot of people in between as well, right? Like, I mean, in the west or the center of the United States. And in Brazil, the same thing. Like, we also have a lot of Brazilians like living throughout the country, but foreign citizens in particular, I guess, like the beach side or the coastal side of the experience is very attractive to foreign citizens, as we can tell from our transactions, particularly in real estate. Okay, let's see what else we have to discuss. Let's see. Yes, we have here, just an update in terms of the immigration procedures. Nowadays, the Brazilian administration, they are asking for special types of certificates to be used through the process of applying. And we have been, we make sure that our systems are fully aligned with those requirements from the Brazilian administration. But what I think is interesting here is that, many people, when they come to us, they assume that immigration regulations and requirements, they are kind of static, and not really. And I would say, listen, just like the United States, or maybe not like the United States nowadays, which is actually all over the place, but pretty much any country, they are going to have updates to their immigration framework, right? So very important for you to understand, like regulations, the rules, the requirements, numbers, they do change over time. And that's what we see happening, at least from a more granular level in terms of the procedures that we handle here at the firm. They are changing, I would say slightly as we speak, okay? But in terms of the main visas or the main pathways for you to come to Brazil, they remain the same, at least for now. One common question we have pretty much every other day is whether or not the minimum investment for you to secure the real estate investor visa, if it's going to change or not. We don't have notice. And then the follow-up question is typically whether there's going to be some grandfathering of rights. Let's say if you start the process, like if Brazil is going to say, well, because you started, now we're going to apply the old standard in terms of investment. And the Brazilian administration, the federal administration in Brazil, just like elsewhere, they have a full discretion. Okay, so they could say, you know what, there is no notice time, there is no grandfathering, meaning that if you don't qualify, you don't. But Brazilian immigration is typically they try to avoid being harsh. And I think that once they decided to update the minimum amount for the Brazil investor visa, they are going to give some, a notice time. And I think in my guess, right, and that's a guess because whoever is deciding, they are going to pick the timeline. My guess is that it would be at least 6 months, because the mindset here is that if you are in the process of buying a property, 6 months should be enough for you to conclude the purchase and file for the real estate investor visa. All right, I hope it makes sense. Let's take a look over here. Matt, for the retirement visa, you have the required letter from my bank this week. Once your firm starts the visa process, at what point should the applicant apply for FBI background check? Matt, my recommendation is for you to think about when you are arriving in Brazil, okay, and then apply like 2 months before this target date, okay, because in between, if you do the fingerprinting in the United States, after you do the fingerprinting, it takes you like a couple of days for the FBI to send you the background check as a PDF attached to an email, and then you can forward this email to us, and then once we get your FBI background check, we're gonna have this document apostilled in Washington, D.C. And after this document is apostilled, then we need to have this document physically available for your appointment in Brazil. And like this timeline, it could be approximately like 45 days. So that's why I say 2 months before your timeline to arrive in Brazil, because the idea here is that once you get to Brazil, the FBI background check is going to be available and valid for your application. A challenge we have, as you probably know, is like the 90 days expiration time, like as per the Brazilian immigration. They require that your background check is not older than 90 days at the time of application. Okay, so that's why we like it to be done like a couple of months before your arrival date in Brazil, so things can work more or less at the same time, if you will. General principle, would you be able to talk about foreigners renting property, finding a property manager, handling taxes, IPTU, condomínio? Is this something your firm can assist with? General principle, yes. So whenever we talk about foreigners renting property, right? When you say finding a property manager, my understanding is that you're not renting as a tenant, you are renting as the owner of the property, right? So yes, that's very common. Like many of our clients who invest in real estate in Brazil, they are going to use the property occasionally, and then they are going to rent the property out through short-term rentals. Okay, that's the majority of our investor clients. And whenever you're doing so, it is a good idea to have a property manager. The property manager could help with the listings, receiving guests on your behalf, handling, right? Like, I mean, the, payment of HOA and other things. Now, unfortunately, General Principal, this process of working with a property manager is less streamlined than you would suppose. And it does work better, in my opinion, in cities like Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo, because they are, these are big cities with many service providers. But for instance, in São Paulo, we have like a service provider, like a property manager. They basically just handle the short-term rentals. Okay, so they don't help you pay like the HOA. They don't help you pay for the annual property tax, right? But they do a good kind of good job in terms of handling the short-term rentals. They charge 20% of the proceeds. So whenever you are, evaluating if it is worth the trouble, you need to kind of consider all of those costs, right? So 20% for the property manager. There is like, I think it is 10 to 12% for the, either Airbnb or Booking.com. Booking.com is very popular in Brazil. And then you need to pay, taxes. If you are a non-resident, your tax is going to be 15% of this income. And if you are a resident, it could be even higher, right? But I mean, it is what it is. For many clients, when they are doing the short-term rentals, they are not really pursuing a specific a rate of return or a return over investment. They are more concerned about, having some string of income to kind of offset the cost of ownership, right? Because particularly in Brazil, HOA fees, they are much higher than what you would experience in the United States, for instance, right? Like in the United States, if you live like sometimes in a fancy neighborhood, you're going to pay $500 as an annual homeowners association fee, right? And when it's like not a gated community, when it's more just a regular community, if it is a gated community, it could be, I don't know, $1,000 per year or $2,000 per year. Now, in Rio de Janeiro, if you have a fancy property, $1,000 to $2,000 could be the homeowners association for a single month, right? So as you can tell, these costs, they would add up substantially. So if you're doing short-term rental, you can kind of mitigate or offset those costs, if you will. All right. And yes, I mean, we do assist some clients, General Principal, with property management, but it's not like for every single property, because not all properties, they are going to be accessible by our staff, right? So it really depends on the city, on the neighborhood. And when, the client has this desire, typically we ask them to work with our, partner realtors, because then they can pick a property that's going to be compatible with our, let's say, with our logistics in the target city. Okay, so if that's something of your interest, we can certainly share, some realtors who work with you. And if they follow those specific parameters, then that's something we could potentially provide. But that's something, like a little bit more, how can I say, more involved than people would assume, okay? All right. And what else do we have over here? We have bills to pay. Is there financing for American buyers interested in buying in Rio? So, the answer is typically no, right? I mean, most of the time, like the traditional Brazilian lenders, they are going to be picky about naturally about how you can prove your income and also about your credit. And just like in the United States, those things, they are going to be proved through either paperwork or something that is going to be coming from a system. So if you are a newcomer in Brazil, guess what? You're not going to have a credit history that is going to be sufficient for a mortgage, right? That's the first challenge. The second challenge is that, sorry, I apologize for that. I have my phone is on do not disturb, but is still ringing over here. Hold on a second. All right. Yeah, it's on do not disturb, but I don't know how it can continue to ring. All right. So that's the challenge, right? When you are applying for a mortgage in Brazil, let's say you don't have a credit history. That's the first part of the challenge. The second part of the challenge is going to be your income. So even if you make big bucks, let's say in the United States or Europe, for the Brazilian lender, they don't have a way to verify because even if you are providing, let's say, a W-2 or a tax return, like how can the Brazilian lender know if that's true or not? Like they simply don't have like the systems, they don't have the capability to verify what you are providing. However, that's the good part of my explanation, bills to pay. Once time passes, guess what? First, you're going to have a credit history. Time passes, really fast. So in a couple of years, guess what? You're going to have a credit history in Brazil after you secure your CPF tax ID. And in terms of income, after you've been in Brazil for over 183 days in any given 365, it doesn't need to be calendar year. It's like a moving bracket trying to catch you. So once you exceed the 183 days, guess what? You're going to be a tax resident, meaning that you're going to file your taxes in Brazil and you're going to disclose every single flow of income, every single income that you have in the United States or any other country, right? And then when you file your tax return in Brazil, guess what? The Brazilian tax return is something that is verifiable by the bank. So my answer should be, at the beginning, no, you're not going to qualify for a mortgage. But after you are, into this journey for a few years, yes, you would qualify. You would most probably, right? Because it depends on the specifics. You would most probably qualify for a mortgage in Brazil. This said, I'm talking about traditional mortgage, everyday mortgage. Every now and then, I hear about a bank like developing a special credit line for foreign citizens. Okay, and sometimes it is active, sometimes it's not. It's not very consistent, and it is not present across the board. So maybe even at the beginning of your journey, maybe you can find one of those special lines, okay? Another nuance is that whenever you're buying like off-plan, because you're asking about buying real, right? So whenever you're buying off-plan during the construction stage, typically the developer is going to extend the finance to you, meaning that you're going to be making payments on a monthly basis. They also have like quarterly payments. Sometimes they have like an annual payment. They have very different. They have different payment frequencies on top of each other, and during this initial stage, they are typically not really picky in terms of your financials. Now the problem is, and that's a challenge I have to explain in pretty much every single consultation I have with my clients whenever they're discussing off-plan properties, is that once the property is ready, guess what? The developer, 9 times out of 10, they are not going to deliver the unit until you either pay off in full the balance or you go out there by yourself, okay, and secure finance for the balance, right? So that's my concern. Whenever you're in Rio, and typically when you are in Rio, you're very happy, you are in a positive mood, and you attend a sales stand, and people are very convincing that you're doing such a great deal. But they never ask you this question: listen, are you going to be able to pay the balance, at the time of delivering the keys? And if you ask, all right, so is there finance? Guess what the realtor is going to tell you? Because whatever the realtor is telling you is not going to necessarily show up in the contract. So very often realtors are going to say, of course you're going to get a loan, right? And of course they cannot guarantee you're going to get a loan. So they are basically trying to convince you to buy the off-plan property, and they are basically postponing this, let's say, moment of truth in which you're gonna need to decide if you have available funds or if you're gonna be able, to secure finance. So that's a major point of concern. Okay. All right. What else do we have over here? All right, Tora, once we sign on with your firm, can we talk directly on the phone or through Zoom with you or your associates? I called the phone number on the email and there was only a recording. Yes, Tora. So we're typically very busy working with clients. We don't have anyone typically to get the phone calls, even though we do take phone calls sometimes. But when you work with us, the typical channels, they are not going to be a phone number for you to call. We're going to set up, we have 2 ways to have a kind of close communication with you. First one is typically through, we have a portal in which you see how your case is progressing. It has the documents that you are uploading. It has the status of your case as it's moving along. So this helps substantially. The second way is through Zoom calls, right? So if you need a Zoom call, you say, listen, I have a question on this point. Can we discuss that in a Zoom call? And then we typically schedule for the next day, and you can schedule that as many times as you need. There is no limit on those Zoom calls, right? And the third one, for some clients, particularly those who are in Brazil already, they are going to ask us to set up a WhatsApp group. WhatsApp, for those of you who don't know, is like a kind of, communication chat app, which is absolutely loved in Brazil by everyone. And, we just use it as a tool because guess what? Everyone else is using. Whenever we're going to need to communicate with a realtor, with another party, typically that's going to be done through WhatsApp. Nobody calls anybody anymore, right? In Brazil, I'm talking about the local culture. But going back to your question, yes, you can have as many Zoom calls as you want. We typically reply to messages, emails by the next day. Time of our office hours are Monday to Friday, 9 to 6 p.m. And to answer your question about our associates or myself, it works pretty much like this. Most of the work is done through an associate, but I'm typically in the loop, right? So if something goes wrong, like you say, well, can Luciano participate in this call? Then we just need to schedule a call in a time that is going to work for both of us and you, and that can happen without an issue. All right, Tora, I hope that was helpful. Sija, I hope you're doing well. Can you please comment on what's the time frame for parents getting the passport after childbirth in Brazil? Yes, Sija. So, the timeline, it may vary depending on where you are in Brazil, because different states and different cities, they may have different timelines for the documents, right? When you have a child, after the child is born, first document that's going to be required is going to be birth certificate for the child. After the child has a birth certificate, you're going to need to pursue a second document for the child, which is the national ID card. It's not the passport. Many people assume, well, I need to get a passport so they can tell my child is a Brazilian. So in Brazil, we don't assert citizenship by a passport. We assert citizenship by the birth certificate. So once your child has a birth certificate and the Brazilian national ID card, in theory, you're going to be free to apply for the permanent residency. And for the permanent residency, remember, you're going to need like the apostilled background check. For some countries, that's going to be easy to obtain. For instance, like in the Arab Emirates, that's something you can get online in a couple of weeks. In the United Kingdom, that's also easy for you to order remotely. You can obtain in a couple of weeks. Not the United States. The United States, because the gold standard in terms of background check is the FBI background check. This is going to take typically a couple of months. And you need to pay attention because the background check is going to be good for just 90 days. So you need to find out when you're going to be able to obtain the background check so you can use it in your application for the permanent residency, right? So altogether, we're talking here about, birth certificate and first ID card, maybe a month and a half. Then you need to work on your documents. Let's say if you are working in parallel, maybe it's taking you like a couple of months to obtain. So let's say a couple of months after the birth of your child, you could potentially secure the residency, right? The residency, it comes first as a temporary paper, and then a couple of months later, that's when you're gonna get the national, resident card for a foreign citizen. Okay, so altogether we spoke here like about 4 months. All right, so the idea is after a single year living in Brazil as the parent of a Brazilian child, you can have a shot at the citizenship after 1 year. So let's say 4 months down the line, you are in a position to start counting the time for your residency, for your citizenship application. Now, timeline is very short, right? So you could potentially be applying for the Brazilian citizenship in 1 year and 4 months. Now, the real challenge here is that you need to speak advanced Portuguese. And if you've been living in Brazil for just 1 year and 4 months, I personally never saw anyone who could be, communicating in advanced Portuguese in just 1 year and 4 months. Now, every case is different, right? We have many permanent residents, spouses of a Brazilian who happen to be practicing Portuguese for a long, long time. So every case is different. So let's say if in 1 year and 4 months you can communicate in Portuguese, yes, you can take a shot at the Brazilian citizenship. And then at least here at the office, cases they are taking in average a year for the new citizenship to be granted. So altogether, let's round this up, 2 years and a half after the child was born. And again, that's a very rough estimate that is going to vary substantially depending on the applicant and case specifics, all right? But there you go, 2 years and a half It could be like an average timeline for this journey. And again, you must be able to communicate in advanced Portuguese, not like just basic. It needs to be advanced. Actually, it's more like intermediary. I like to say advanced to make a case that is not just any level of Portuguese. It gotta be something more meaningful in a sense that you can establish and maintain a reasonable conversation with another person. All right, Matt, thank you so much. Matt is buying me dinner today. Very generous of you. Thank you, Matt and Adrian. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And Matt and Adrian saying thank you for the live streams and answering our questions. Very happy to be of assistance, Matt and Adrian. Thank you so much. Tora, will be able to help with my CPF in Brazil. I have a Brazilian CPF, but since getting it, I had to legally correct my first name, and now I need to change my first name on my CPF in Brazil. Tora, I think if it is just a name update on the CPF, that is something we can potentially help with within the same assignment. For more complex like name changes, and if the procedure becomes like too cumbersome, then we may need to have this as a separate service. But that's something we can typically assist with. All right, Tora. Name changes, right? Like on a card, on a resident card, on a passport, on a birth certificate in Brazil, they are really time consuming and really, complex. But for the CPF, not so much usually. All right, Tora. So if the update is just on the Brazilian CPF, chances are this is not going to be something too complicated. Higgins, hi Higgins, what documents are necessary to close on condo purchase in Florianopolis? I'm closing electronically. Higgins, so, for the closing, it depends on the cartório, on the registry, right? Like different registries, they may have different requirements. Not unusual for different registries in the same city to have different requirements. But let's assume you are buying as an individual, then, the main documents are going to be a passport. They are going to be, proof of civil status. So if you are single, then you would be presenting. And all of those documents, they need to be legalized, right? Like, so typically they are not going to be just scanned. They need to go through a very specific legalization cycle. But we're just talking about the documents, right? So about your civil status for a single person, we're talking about a birth certificate showing the parents' names on it. And it also should be somewhat fresh, like issued in the last 90 days. That's for buying property, all right? It's not the same thing for immigration purposes. For immigration purposes, the Brazilian immigration, typically, they don't care if your birth certificate is a year or a couple of years old. For buying properties, typically, the registry wants the document to be not older than 90 days. And the reason for that is very interesting. Maybe some of you know the reason for that. And the reason for that is because in Brazil, whenever we marry or whenever we divorce, or guess what? If we die, our birth certificate is going to bring an annotation of that fact. So let's say if I'm married today, the cartório, the registry in which I'm marrying, they are going to send a message to the cartório in which my birth certificate is registered, and they are going to add a message to my birth certificate saying that I got married. Right? So the parallel here is that the registry is going to be asking for your birth certificate, thinking that by looking at your birth certificate, they are going to know that you are single or not. And we, of course, we all know that in the United States, there is no such a thing as recording marriages or other civil events on the birth certificate. But the local cartório in Brazil, they either don't know about it, or if they don't know, they don't care. They are just following the procedure. Okay, so that's why for a single buyer, most often a birth certificate with less than 90 days is going to be required to be presented. Now, if you're married, then you're going to present instead a marriage certificate. Marriage certificate should have parents' names for both spouses, and the property in Brazil, it must be recorded on both names. It cannot be recorded just on one name, right? Like very typical in the United States, people buy any way they want. Sometimes they buy, within a marriage, and they are gonna buy on an individual name. That's not feasible in Brazil, right? And whenever people try to do those things that are not compatible with the way that they should be done in Brazil, they typically have big headaches down the line because they skipped on the right process at a certain point, like in the past. Okay, so we spoke about birth certificate, we spoke about marriage certificate. Now let's assume you've been divorced. Most cartórios in Brazil, they also gonna ask for your prior divorce. Okay, if you are divorced. And guess what? The prior marriage as well. They want to have a sequence of your civil status in the records, okay? So we spoke about passport, birth certificate. We spoke about a divorce certificate. And there may be other documents, right? These documents I told you right now, Higgins, they are the most common. Now, for the legalization steps, the sequence is typically, and I say typically because, again, the registry may have a saying on how they want the documents should be recorded, but the sequence is typically apostille in the United States, right, or another country, apostille, and then once this document is physically in Brazil, a sworn translation, which is a special type of translation. After the sworn translation, registration at a different cartório called RTD. And at the RTD, after these documents have been registered, that's when they are amenable. That's when they are typically enough for a closing, right? But of course, if you're going to be attending a closing in Brazil, I strongly recommend you to be advised by someone so you don't find out that you don't have the proper documentation by time of closing. If that happens, many times you're gonna trigger penalties, right? Because typically the purchase agreement is gonna set a date for the closing, and guess what? If you don't meet the specific deadline, then typically penalties are gonna be triggered, and that's why Higgins, we typically don't work with real estate cases just for a certain stage, because that's not ideal, right? Like we like to work from the beginning to the end, because now in this way we know your story, we know your documents, we work all the way through completion if it makes sense to you. General principle, thank you, Senor Oliveira. Follow-up question: if the property owner decides to rent longer term, is it more hands-off, low risk than short-term rental? Yes, general principle, for sure. That's for sure, right? So whenever you're doing like a regular rental, then you're not gonna have all this influx of new people coming into your property with luggage. Many times, creating aggravation for the condominium. And I have an example for you, General Principal, because it just came to my mind, right? Because you asked that question. We have a client who bought an apartment in Rio de Janeiro. He actually bought two, right? He bought one for him and a second one for rental. And the second apartment, I think it was for something like 3 million reais. Like at closing, we made sure that everything was paid off, like the condominiums and this and that. And guess what happened? a couple of months into the ownership, he received a fine for 45,000 reais, so almost $10,000, because of a situation that happened under short-term rental. Okay, and according to the seller, there was actually a kind of bad blood between the prior owner, the one who sold the property to our client, and the president of the HOA, and that's why the fine was like almost $10,000 for a short-term rental situation. And then we couldn't catch the fine because the fine was kind of the situation was shortly before the sale, so the fine materialized after our client bought the property and took possession. Right? Naturally, there is recourse by our client to pursue, the payment from the seller, which naturally we got in touch with the seller, said, all right, now what? Are you gonna pay, or do we need to go after you, right? And she was, like a very how can I say, a business, a very business experienced a person, and she actually filed a lawsuit against the HOA president, and in the process, she also asked the court to suspend the fine. Right, so that's some background story, general principle, just to highlight that short-term rentals typically they do involve a lot of aggravation, right? Particularly in Rio de Janeiro. In Rio de Janeiro, right, you have all types of persons coming to your apartment, and not unusual for party people to show up. All right, there you go. Matt, does the bank letter, proof of passive income and ability to do international wire transfers for the retirement visa need an apostille? If so, who would apostille? Yes, Matt. For the retirement track, pretty much everything will need an apostille. So for those things who are not being issued by the government, what we do, we have an affidavit done typically by our office in Dallas. So we're basically going to say, listen, we got this document from our client, and I attest that's what we got from our client. And then the signature of the person signing this affidavit is going to be notarized first, and then the notarization is going to receive the apostille. So that's how you secure an apostille. It's not apostilled by the government attesting to the document, is actually the state attesting to the notarization of the document. Okay, and that's done across the board. All right, Coleman. I just did it in Rio, and they didn't want the divorce paperwork from the States. Yes, Coleman, that's a good point. Rio de Janeiro is by far the state less demanding in terms of documents. Okay, in Rio de Janeiro, and I think it was a year and a half or 2 years ago, they started to allow closings even without birth certificate. And if you buy a property in São Paulo, if you buy a property in Florianopolis, you would never buy a property without showing a birth certificate, because that's pretty much settled in the regulation for the registries. And in Rio de Janeiro, there was a flexibilization of these requirements. So in Rio de Janeiro, nowadays, the standard is pretty different than what you see in other states. But I remember, like when we had the first case, it was actually a realtor who told us, well, I just got an escritura, right, or a closing done without a birth certificate. I couldn't believe. I said, no, I mean, they're of course they are wrong. And then until the realtor would share the closing paperwork for us to see, I wouldn't believe it was the case. But nowadays we know that in Rio de Janeiro, there is a lot of flexibility in terms of the documents. So many people, they are attending closings pretty much with just a passport if they are single. If you're married, guess what? There is not going to be flexibility in terms of the document requirement. On the divorce, they may skip, because the idea here is that you're no longer in a marriage. But if you're married, they are not going to skip on the marriage certificate requirement, even for Rio de Janeiro. Sidia, what would you recommend for digital nomad visa? The $1,500 per month for 3 months, or the total amount like 18,000 for 3 to 6 as bank statement? Sidia, it typically depends on whether you're getting those 1,500 from the same company providing, like the contract or the proof of employment. If everything is straight, everything matches, the 1,500 typically works well. The 18,000 we usually recommend for those who have a letter from one company but are being paid by another. And in this case, the 18,000 typically solves the financial side of it. Now, super common this question, and I don't know why. For me, it doesn't make much sense, but very common. People are going to ask, well, if I'm showing 18,000, then I don't need to show any evidence of work, right? And the answer is no. Yes, you still need to present evidence of remote work, even if you're providing the 18,000. And the way I try to explain to them, I say, listen, if you would be enough for you to show 18,000 US dollars, this would not be the digital nomad visa. That would be the $18,000 visa, right? Because basically anyone who would have 18,000 could secure. So it's not the digital nomad, it's the 18,000 visa. And there is no such thing as the $18,000 visa. And therefore, you need to show the $18,000 plus the letter of employment. All right, so the point here, Sidia, we typically look at the specific circumstances of the relationship between the entity proving the remote work and how you are being paid, and then we're gonna make a decision after that. Another nuance, Sidia, is that whenever we talk about those factors, how the immigration reviews things and so on, we are always talking about immigration while physically in Brazil. Because when you're dealing with consulates, guess what? Decisions, they are going to be all over the place. And it's very difficult for us to articulate the requirements with confidence, just because they are all over the place. So if you are applying through a consulate, then unfortunately we cannot help much, because whatever we tell you, it may be different from what is being enforced by the consulate. And before you ask, the requirements, at least from a legal perspective, they are the same, but I assure you, they are not articulated by the consulate the same way they are in Brazil. And I can give you an example. Many consulates, like in the Middle East, Asia, Africa, they basically don't even offer the digital nomad, right? Because they think people are coming to Brazil through like the Brazil digital nomad visa and are not going to leave. So basically, they either do not offer, or if they offer, even if you provide a fully compliant paperwork, they are not going to approve it. All right, Higgins, can sellers sign at notario when paid in full and buying sign later? No contract penalties because paid even though not closed. Triggered. Higgins, not typical, all right? Most cartórios, they don't like that. We have some partner cartórios, not in Florianopolis, in other states, that will sometimes do that, but that's, like for a day or two of a timeline and based on relationship, okay? But the registries, they don't like to do that, and they are not supposed to do that. This is supposed to be a single act, right? So if they collect the signature of one party and then leave it to collect the second one, way down the line, they are actually incurring into an infraction. Now, again, right, like there is some flexibility depending on who's working with the registry, if terms are negotiated. In our experience, like, in some transactions here at the firm, yes, there may be 1 day or a couple of days between one party signing and the other one. But this is typically because, let's say, we cannot find a common time for both parties to show up. So we do in a kind of asynchronous manner, as long as this thing is going to be completed in a day or two. Okay, Higgins. But in this case, I would recommend, again, seek advice with the party who's handling your transaction. Tora, your firm helps with getting our documents with apostille here in the U.S. I need to do the apostille in the U.S. even if I'm doing the retirement visa process in Brazil. Tora, yes. Okay. We don't do the legwork in other states. Typically, what we do, Tora, we share service providers who are going to do the legwork for you. So let's assume you were born in California, right? In California, apostilles, they are provided in 2 different cities. They are provided in Sacramento, and they are provided in Los Angeles. Right. So if you live in Los Angeles, right, or if you live in Sacramento, some people, they're going to say, you know what, like, I mean, I'm retired. I'm going to spend like half my day or, 2 half days, one to go and another one to pick it up, and I'm going to handle myself. So that happens every now and then. But most people, they're going to say, listen, can you tell me who's a good service provider that I can basically just send my document and handle this thing for me? And this is something we do for our clients. Like, we provide such referrals. So if you are, I don't know, if you're in Wisconsin, if you are in Florida, if you are in Illinois, any states, like, we typically have a referral for someone who can go and do the legwork on your behalf. Of course, there is typically a fee, and we basically tell you, listen, just pay the service provider directly most of the time, right? Sometimes, depending on the specifics, we can also, charge you and handle ourselves, let's say, for taxes. So my suggestion, Tora, is that, like, once you just keep that in mind, that once you engage our service, then you discuss about the best way to secure the apostilles that you're going to need for your process, all right? But yes, we do have like referrals. For some of them, we can even do it ourselves. And it's always reviewed on a case-by-case basis. All right, Coleman, I had to show my birth certificate with my parents' name. Oh, look at that, Coleman. So yeah, we have cases in which there is no birth certificate presented. It's just like a form that they are going to fill out and a kind of attest to their parents' names. Samuel, hello, which city is faster for process of getting immigration in Brazil? Samuel, interesting question, right? Interesting question. There are different components of an immigration journey when you are applying in Brazil, and many of the immigration pathways, they are going to use something that is on a national basis. Okay, so for instance, digital nomad, retirement, real estate investor, all of them, they start with a national component. So they are not city-based. You're basically filing with a system that is called a Migrante Web. I think the current version is 2.0. And then you use the system, you file with the national authority. And then after this is approved, which is very interesting, after it's approved, that's when you're going to have an appointment. And the appointment is going to, for the appointment is going to matter the city that you are in, but not the prior stage, because the prior stage, like I said, is national. For the appointment, yes, it's going to make a difference. And like the timelines, they change over time. Sometimes a state or a city, they are overwhelmed. It takes longer for them. Other times, it is some type of a system change that they're implementing. But just to give you an example, or maybe giving you an idea about the differences. Nowadays, for you to secure an appointment in Santa Catarina, it can easily take 2 to 3 months. For Rio de Janeiro, even though a super popular city, typically we can get an appointment for the next month. All right. So, and there was another question I heard like recently. Well, if it is like a small town, does it mean I'm gonna have a better chances? And I would say if it is a small town in Santa Catarina, most probably it's gonna take way longer than what's gonna take for you to secure an appointment in Rio de Janeiro, which is a pretty big city by any standards. Okay, so different cities, different states, different metrics, different methodologies of handling applications. All right, that's an interesting question. All right, so I wanna say thank you to all of you for such interesting questions today. I'm always excited when I have lots of questions and such interesting questions. I want to say thank you again to Matt and Adrian for the generous gift here live, and we're gonna have our next live stream is gonna be actually let me see. I'm almost sure it's gonna be on Sunday. Let me see if I can confirm with you right now. And I think it's gonna be the last Sunday. Sunday, yes, it's gonna be on Sunday. All right, so we're gonna have a live stream on Sunday. We're trying to have at least a couple of live streams on a Sunday per month. So we already had a live stream this month of March on a Sunday. This is gonna be the second and naturally the last live stream on a Sunday in March, and it's gonna be March the 29th. And just remember, on Wednesdays, we meet at 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time. And on Sundays, we meet a little later in the day at 3:30 Rio de Janeiro time. So all of you are invited. If you have more comments, questions, make sure to show up on Sunday. And we're going to be happy to extend this conversation. And thank you again. And